India is struggling with an acute organ shortage, as is evident here. It has amongst the lowest organ donation rates in the world. Lakhs of patients die tragically while waiting for an organ. A single organ donor can save up to 8 lives and heal many more. Such is the power of organ donation. MOHAN Foundation began advocating this cause at a time when no one in the country was talking about it, and the environment was fairly hostile towards this taboo topic. It has been striving to create awareness and remove myths in the society. It has innovatively shown the way forward to various stakeholders. It has also been building capacities of medical professionals and has been the foremost training body helping create a cadre of professionals called the transplant coordinators. Its unique e-learning course is the first of its kind in the region. The transplant coordinators do the unenviable task of counseling families to encourage them to donate the organs of their deceased loved ones, thereby saving multiple lives. Over the years, it has expanded its outreach to newer Indian states by working closely with state governments. The foundation works with several hospitals to help them put systems in place. It has been liaising with government bodies to pass favorable legislations. All this has resulted in an increase in donations over the years. The helpline that started off as an information tool has also been coordinating for real-time donations, including one in Dubai. The foundation has effectively used technology to assist medical and paramedical professionals. It has also developed and maintains web registries for organ distribution in various states. Thanks to MOHAN Foundation's consistent advocacy for inclusion of organ donation wish in the driving licenses, the Indian government introduced the same in April 2018. In its constant quest for spreading awareness, it came up with innovative ways like lighting up of significant monuments across the country in green and showcasing unique exhibitions such as Life Before Ashes to evoke public consciousness. MOHAN Foundation's work has been acknowledged at various forums and has been recognized through many prestigious awards.
Thank you very much, Jaya and Shiv Shankar, for the video. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this. Gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this afternoon for celebrating the 50 years. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So it gives great pleasure to welcome you all to this 50th year of celebrating kidney transplantation. And, great honor to have Professor Mohan Rao from Adelaide. It's evening for him, a little late, 8 o'clock for him, and with a very short notice for joining us. And Professor, Chaku from Bangalore to, both stalwarts. And Professor Johnny could not join because he doesn't have Zoom connection at his home. We did invite, Professor K.V. Johnny as well, because 50 years today, on 2nd of February 1971, was a very remarkable day, because the first successful live kidney transplantation was done at Christian Medical College, Vellore, by Professor Mohan Rao. And I, along with my colleague, Dr. Georgie Abraham, wanted to do something for this for this day today and celebrate it, because it is a very historical day. If it wasn't for the COVID, perhaps we would have had a proper function, but I think in these circumstances, this is the best we could do. So with these words, I would like to introduce Professor Mohan Rao first, and then Professor Jacob Chaku. Jacob Chaku. I just want to say Dr. Georgie Abraham is well known nephrologist in the country. He is also the pioneer of peritoneal dialysis in the country. I've had a long association with him. I've known him now for almost more than 25 years. We worked together to establish the organ donation program at Sri Ramchandra Medical College. We did many disease donations together. We did a lot of peritoneal dialysis work together. He has more than 200 publications to his credit. He is a professor at Pondicherry Institute of Medical Sciences. He is also the trustee, founder trustee of Tanker Foundation, a well-known foundation which helps the underprivileged for dialysis. And they've done huge amount of work in this area. Well renowned in the country for all his contributions to the field of nephrology. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Georgie Abraham to be my co-moderator for this session. And I'm just going to share some slides to introduce both Professor Mohan Rao and Professor Jacob Chakur. And Dr. Georgie Abraham will formally introduce them. Are you able to see my slide?
Yes.
So, Dr. Georgie, over to you.
Good evening, Dr. Mohan Rao, and good afternoon, my colleagues from India. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to have known Dr. Mohan Rao ever since I joined at Vellore in 1975 as a senior house surgeon and Dr. Chako Jacob. Dr. Mohan Rao has done his undergraduate and postgraduate medical training at the Christian Medical College, Vellore. He was in the very first batch of Indianly trained urologists under Dr. H.S. Bhatt. In 1968, he was deputed by Christian Medical College Hospital by Dr. Chandy, late Dr. Chandy, to train as a transplant surgeon in Adelaide. His first training in renal transplantation surgery at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I had the great privilege to visit him in 1991 with one of the VIPs from Tamil Nadu to have a transplant done under Dr. Mohan Rao from his sister being the donor. And in 1968 to January 1971, he was trained there. He was trained under the Doyen Mr. Peter Knight, who performed the first successful kidney transplantation in Australia. On his return, he performed the first successful kidney transplant in Vellore, in India, in February 2nd, 1971. That too is a Tuesday, like today. He played a key role in the establishment of renal transplantation in India and abroad in other institutions. In recognition of his role in initiating renal transplantation in India, Professor Mohan Rao was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award by the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation in 1997 at Chennai, although he was not there present. And I was organizing secretary and Sunil Shop, and both of us got together to have a very successful Indian Transplant Society meeting. Professor Mohan Rao was professor and head of the Department of Urology for many years at CMC Vellore until he left for Australia. He moved to Australia in 1976 and has been in Adelaide as a senior consultant transplant surgeon. With his vast experience with live donor transplantation, the live donor program was recommenced at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Adelaide. In 1995, he replaced the conventional renal angiogram with CT angiogram. His most significant contribution is the introduction of laparoscopic donor nephrectomy. This procedure was performed for the first time in Australia at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in 1997, just 14 months after the first laparoscopic donor nephrectomy was done in USA. He has helped other teams in Australia and has introduced his technique to India, Malaysia, and China. He has trained transplant surgeons, many transplant surgeons in India and abroad. And next slide, please. After his retirement in 2011, He worked as a visiting consultant in surgery at the Prince Court Medical Center, Kuala Lumpur, for 4 years, and as a professor of surgery at the National University of Malaysia for 2 years. In 2013, he performed the first kidney transplant in Brunei, and now completely supports the local team assisting every transplant. He was named an angel by the Australian Kidney Foundation and was awarded the SA Great Award in 1998. The government of Australia confirmed AM member of the Order of Australia in 2009 for his contribution to surgery and treatment of kidney failure. Royal Australian College of Surgery, SA, has awarded him the Anstey of Memorial Lecture Award in 2008 and Sir Henry Newland Award in 2017. Professor Chaco Jacob, he's a close friend of mine, and I always call him whenever I have a problem with any of my patients with regard to kidney disease. He is an undergraduate and postgraduate and nephrology training at the Christian Medical College Hospital, Vellore, advanced training in nephrology and transplantation at the University of Edmonton, Canada, and Queen Elizabeth Hospital in South Australia. He was on faculty at Vellore from 1980 to 2006, and again on contract till some more years. Has over 120 publications in peer-reviewed journals and chapters in 7 textbooks. He was president of the Indian Society of Nephrology in 2017, awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Indian Society of Nephrology and Nephrology Association of Karnataka, where he is stationed now. Currently visiting consultant at Bangalore Baptist Hospital and in kidney transplant at the Baptist Hospital in Bangalore.
Thank you, Dr. Georgie, for this introduction of our guest. So we'll start this conversation with both Dr. Mohan Rao and Professor Chaco Jacob. I just would like to take Dr. Mohan Rao back to 1971 on that Tuesday, as Dr. Georgie said as well. You know, in Tamil Nadu at least, when I came back to India, people told me Tuesday was never a lucky day. I suppose you don't believe in these things, you know. So please tell us a little bit about what kind of preparation went in. I know you already got trained in Australia, Dr. Monroe. So what kind of preparation did you undertake before you started the first kidney transplant? And tell us a little bit about the recipient, the donor, and the preparation which you did before taking them out.
Thank you for the introduction about me. I think you know so good for this. I was sent with a specific purpose of learning transplants. It was something that started in a very planned fashion by sending us to Australia to a very active unit. And it was a small unit.
Dr. Monroe, could you get closer to your mic if you don't mind, please?
Yeah.
Because you're not so audible.
Yeah, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is a smaller unit compared to Melbourne or Sydney. And but the first transplant was done there. And I had the fortune to work with Peter Knight, who was my mentor. And I learned the principles from him. Unfortunately, he left a year after I joined the unit as the foundation professor in one of the universities in Canada. So I had to hold the baby there. We had the professor of surgery, who was not a transplanter, but you know, he was the head of the setup. So I have had the opportunity to do number of transplants and manage the complications. That gave me the confidence to start off when I returned. Johnny was with me at that time. We both were in the same unit, but he returned about 10 months earlier than me to Willow. So he picked up the future candidates, prepared them with dialysis. And I returned in November 1970, and I went and saw Dr. Webb, who was our director at that time. And he was very cautious, and he said, look, don't start unless you are very confident. And if you lose your first patient, that will be the end of me. And also he wasn't willing to invest anything in terms of infrastructure. So I had to make do with that. In those days, we used to remove native kidneys for every potential recipient. And so I had to do bilateral nephrectomy on these patients. And I couldn't get operating time during the day, so did the operations after theaters are clean, after the day's work. Started about 7 o'clock in the evening. And I used to do both the donor and the recipient. And I'll do the donor and leave it on for Johnny to perfuse the kidney and hand it over to me to put it in.
So, Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you did a native nephrectomy on the recipient. How many weeks or months before the transplant? The first one.
The first one we did about 2 or 3 weeks
2
ahead
weeks
of.
earlier. And the first kidney transplant, which happened on the 2nd of February, you mean you started the operation at 7 o'clock in the evening?
Yeah.
Okay.
My first recipient is a polycystic kidney.
Okay.
So I had to do one kidney at a time. They're too big to be removed at once.
So you removed them 2 or 3 weeks prior to the surgery of actual transplant.
I returned in November, so December and January.
You did the 2 nephrectomies.
I did that.
And how old was your recipient?
Recipient must have been in early 40s.
Was he diabetic, hypertensive, like these days we have
not
mostly?
diabetic, but he was a hypertensive, and we prepared him with hemodialysis.
Okay.
And the donor is about the same age.
Same age. Was it a brother or some relative?
No, relative.
Relative.
And we started about 4 o'clock 7 o'clock in the evening.
The donor nephrectomy.
Donor nephrectomy.
And was it a left kidney you took?
No, unfortunately, it was a right kidney.
Right kidney, okay.
That too with 2 arteries.
2 arteries. Oh wow. So what was it a lower pole artery or was it 2 equal kind of?
Equal size.
Equal size.
Fortunately for me, I have dealt with this sort of anatomical.
But you don't want the first case in India to start with a double artery, I suppose.
I wouldn't educate anybody. I would tell choose a left kidney with a single artery, starting for the first time.
So did you do an aortogram on this patient before?
Oh yeah, that's another story. We didn't have cylinder catheters at that time in our hospital.
I know.
So I talked to the radiologist, and he said, "No, look, I don't have the time to do your angiograms.
Oh wow.
You do yourself," and he explained to me how to do it.
Oh really? Okay.
It is translumbar punctures.
Oh my God.
You make the donor lie down on his face, prone, take a long needle, put it in the renal angle, aiming at the opposite shoulder, and you will hit the spine.
So how kind of heavy? What was the weight of the donor? Was he overweight?
He probably will be about 65.
65. Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad. So you could actually get in.
Yeah, and then you retract it a little bit, angle it at 15 degrees.
But still blind. But it's still a blind puncture for aorta.
The blind puncture. But the minute they tip enters the aorta, you get a good feeling that you are in the right place.
So what size needle was it at that time?
Now, I
Perhaps, if you remember.
Yeah,
18 French? 18, I
maybe
mean 18 gauge?
18 gauge, I think.
18 gauge.
Yeah. And I suppose if you do that procedure now, you will
Yes.
be cautioned or stuck after this.
And
And
then you inject dye, is it? After that?
inject the
Contrast.
dye and take
Yeah.
the pictures.
Oh,
And
God.
it's, uh, I had to do all my angiograms.
Okay.
And fortunately, we didn't have any complications.
So how many weeks before the donor nephrectomy you do the angiogram?
Oh, maybe about 2 weeks.
2 weeks before.
2 weeks in advance.
It must have its morbidity, I suppose the angiogram itself, to some
Oh,
extent.
and we used to do, when I was at the Eastern neurosurgery, we used to do direct puncture of the carotid artery.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was very standard at that time.
Okay.
And the rare incidences where the patient developed hemiplegia or even died.
Oh, God.
So, those are all different eras.
So did you know that the donor had 2 arteries when you do the angiogram, or could you tell actually?
After the angiogram, we realized that the donor had 2
2 arteries on the right, and how many were there on the left?
Left is about 3.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
It was situation there. That's why I had to take the right kidney.
And obviously there's no choice of donor. You got a donor, you got to go ahead with it.
I got only one donor, and
One donor.
this is going to be my first, so I got to make do with what is available.
Was there any apprehension in the family, seeing it was the first transplant in the country at CMC Vellore? Was the family any, those kind of anxieties, how do you deal with that?
Yes, before the surgery, I went to see the donor and the recipient in the ward. And I didn't see the donor's wife. So I asked the recipient's brother, I said, where is this lady? I haven't seen her. Oh, it's Sarah. Tachipochi Pambu Kadisidi.
Sorry, say it again.
Pambu Kadisidi, Tachipote.
Uh,
I said, and it can't be true. She wouldn't have died of snake bite. If she has died, this fellow won't be here. But I didn't want to question or get in deep into that. I just ignored it and went ahead and operated. But the next morning when I went to see the donor, she was there.
yeah.
So I asked the fellows, what has happened? How is it she's resurrected? He said, no, she made a lot of noise. Somebody told me that the kidney also means testes, and he's going to be.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
But that's all. I suppose she was anxious, and
Yeah,
she
very
was
anxious. Very anxious.
and nobody ever had donated a kidney before, and but that's all worked out well.
And the recipient not necessarily anxious as
the kidney, fortunately, the kidney started pouring out urine right on the table.
Oh, right.
And continued.
So the donor nephrectomy started at 7 o'clock. What time did you start the recipient?
Oh, recipient probably about another hour later in the adjoining theater. We had 20 theaters. And Johnny perfused the kidney and handed it over to me. And we finished the operation close to midnight. And I went to the patient's room with him and sat there monitoring him till morning.
So for you, it was not obviously the first kidney transplant. You'd already done quite a few, I'm sure, in Australia.
Yeah.
For you, it was more of a routine job. But for many people watching your operation, it was the first experience, obviously, of having a kidney transplant.
It is true. It was.
Were you under any pressure? Since it was the first for the country, and there were so many people watching anxiously, with your medical students saying that if the first case goes bad, everything is gone. Did you have any pressure on you?
No, I didn't have that much of pressure, except that everybody wanted to be part of the team.
Sure.
Uh, the male nurse who scrubbed up for me since I was a registrar, he insisted that he should be my scrub nurse.
Oh, okay.
And Dr. Butt, who was my chief at the time, he insisted that he should come and assist me.
Right.
And but it was okay. I had no problem. I could.
Young registrar, doing a transplant surgery for the first time in the country with the chief watching. I think, it must be something else. Dr. Chaco, were you there in that room, in the theater that time? Were you, by any chance?
Uh,
Or you came in on the scene later?
no, Sunil, I was very much in Vellore, but not in the department at that time.
You missed this opportunity, this historical opportunity for some reason.
Yeah, 1971, I was trying to din biochemistry into medical students.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. I actually came into the department as a trainee in 72.
Yeah.
So after the first few
Okay.
cases were done,
So okay, after the first few cases. So in biochemistry, you must have actually seen the results of perhaps the donor and the recipients. Perhaps that may have been your kind of contribution to the whole exercise,
well, actually, you see, what happened was that during my MD posting, Dr. Johnny, as usual, disappeared for a long time. So my posting in nephrology, which should have been 3 months, was extended to 6 months. And actually that period of 6 months is what sort of attracted me to the specialty. So after completing my MD, I then came back and joined the department and really been part of the department from 1976 onwards.
Oh, really? Okay. Georgie, you want to ask a question to Dr. Mohan Rao?
Professor Mohan Rao,
Yes, Georgie.
you wouldn't remember that when I started my senior residency in Vellore in 1975, my first posting was in urology.
Oh.
Your trusted colleagues were Dr. Babu and Dr. Pandey, the first MCH trainees.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the theater one day, and there was a transplant which was going on. So I didn't know who you were, but I heard that you were the first transplant surgeon. So I was standing there with a lot of reverence. Then when I came to, you would remember that nearly 29 years ago, I came to Adelaide with a VIP patient from Chennai. And his sister was donating the kidney at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And it so happened that you finished the whole exercise of transplanting him by 1 o'clock. But you did the donor nephrectomy, as you said, and you were flushing the kidney. And then you wanted to do the recipient. And the recipient had a belly of 110 centimeters. So you told me, Georgie, you wash, although I was just an observer, you wash up, please hold the retractor for me. I still remember that. And you made me to hold the retractor because you wanted to put that kidney into that man with a very huge body size. And I was wondering, is this kidney going to work? Because the difficulty in implanting that kidney was so much that I thought that kidney may go into an ATM. But by God's grace and your hand, and I used to tell my colleagues that what an excellent and ideal role model surgeon you are in transplantation, handling the kidney by yourself and with no concerns and no signs of any stress. So I have worshipped you from that time onwards as a transplant surgeon, and I used to tell other people. I am sure that you would remember that in 1998, the World Transplant Congress was in Montreal. Joni was there, and some of us from Vellore were there. I am not sure whether Chaco was there. And we got the news that it was your birthday on that day, 60th birthday. That is in 1998. And you remember we all went to a restaurant, all together, nearly about 24 people. And Kamala Balakrishnan was also there, if I remember correctly. And we celebrated your birthday in 1998 at Montreal during the World Transplant Congress. And in Vancouver during the other transplant congress, I was giving a talk, and somebody was criticizing me for making some comments about the deceased donor transplant and the other transplants in North India. And you strongly supported that, no, what he said is right, because I had to reiterate the same statement again. And so I have always been a worshipper of you, and I look at you with a lot of reverence. And I have been to your house, and you have hosted me when I came in 1991 with your lovely wife and gave me lunch. And also you told me to take your BMW car to go for shopping. Although I had an Indian and British license, you had so much confidence in me. So I think that at this juncture, I want to ask you one specific question. That the technology has advanced, renal transplantation has become a part of our life. And what message you have to give for the young surgeons and the nephrologists who are now practicing? And what would be you as a role model to tell them?
I think I have had I almost all my nephrology colleagues, I pull them in to come and give me a hand, just as you helped me with the transplant. And with the deceased donor, in the early days, I had a shared registrar with urology in Adelaide. And I couldn't, if I can't get that registrar, the consultant nephrologist on call, I used to say, no, come to the theater and give me a hand. And Tim Matthew, you remember him, and he said, oh, look, I never have assisted. The last time I assisted when I was an intern, I nearly cut the finger of the surgeon. And I said, look, otherwise, if you don't come to the theater, I can't retrieve the kidneys. So he came and held the thing. And Mutti Manta, you probably remember him as a trainee in Adelaide, in CMC. He was our registrar in Adelaide, and he's good with his hands. I have helped him doing AV fistulas and converting shunts into AV fistulas. And one day he said, look, can I come and see a retriever? And I said, oh, no, come along. And he came along with his wife, who is also a doctor. I said, look, why don't you do the retrieval yourself? And I kept telling him each step, and he finished. And next day he said, oh, I'd like to come and see the transplant. And I said, well, you do the anastomosis, I'll do the ureter. And he's one nephrologist who has done kidney transplant.
Which year was this, Dr. Mohan Rao?
Yeah.
Which year was
this must be 2015. No, I'm sorry.
About 1995.
1995.
intervention nephrology was started by Dr. Mohan Rao, that means.
Pardon?
Interventional nephrology was actually started by you.
Yes, I think so. I sort of helped Murthy. He's good with that. I had another nephrologist from England who was working in our unit, and he wanted to do PhD using sheep transplant model. I said, I'll come and help you, but if I had to do both nephrectomies and both transplants, it's a long time of work. So I'll teach you, and you do. And I brought him to the stage where he could do one sheep and I'll do the other one. So I think some of the nephrologists are good in hand.
Yes.
I think you've got the talent.
The trend is slowly catching, of interventional nephrologists. I think more and more youngsters are wanting to become interventional. Just like you have in cardiology and gastroenterology and so on. I think interventional nephrology is coming up in a big way. Dr. Mohan Rao, I want to take you back to the day of, the 2nd February back into 1971. I want to ask you some surgical things as well. I'm sure there are some surgical colleagues who want to know these things. What kind of suture material did you use for your anastomosis?
Oh, at that time we used to use black silk.
Black
And
silk.
yeah.
What number?
Hmm?
What number?
Uh, we used to call them
50?
40s.
40?
No, they were not called oh, oh, oh. They used to come as 40s, 60s.
Oh,
A different thing.
so it used to be much thicker than today's proline or
Yeah,
Gore-Tex or whatever.
I think the theater sister used to go to the market
Oh,
and buy the thread from
oh,
the market.
really?
Yeah,
So
and then
you used the black silk.
black silk, and then they will autoclave that.
Yes.
And we didn't have the
So did you use continuous or interrupted somewhere?
interrupted for the
Interrupted for the artery
artery, end to end
and
artery,
vein continuous for the vein.
continuous for the vein. And if it is a deceased donor kidney with aortic patch, then we
Yeah.
use
So
continuous.
you did the right kidney. Did you actually take cuff of the IVC with the right kidney at that time or no?
No, we
No,
didn't take advantage of the
you
IVC
didn't.
at that time.
So
And didn't
so it
want
must
to,
have been a short vein, I suspect.
I didn't want to stretch my luck so much. And the thread we used to put liquid paraffin
Liquid paraffin. Okay.
so that it will slide
Slip.
the,
It'll be more slippery
before
when you actually pass it through the artery or vein.
yeah.
So where did you put the two arteries? On the external and internal, or both on external?
Internal idea.
Both are internal.
Yeah, as end to end into
End to
the
end.
two divisions of the internal iliac artery.
Okay. So you dissected two divisions and put end to end. And how long was your anastomosis time? And that in that case, maybe an hour together, both together.
Probably.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you do the ureter? Did you just it must be
At that time, it was the classic Ledbetter.
Ledbetter.
Yeah.
Okay. And you had immediate urine output. What kind of urine output was it in the first 24 hours?
Oh, probably
Liters?
3 or 4 liters.
3 or 4 liters.
Mm.
And were you measuring your blood parameters, urea, bund, and urea at that time, I suppose, and creatinine,
Yeah.
so on.
We didn't have any ultrasound
Ultrasound. Yes, I know.
and no nuclear scan
Yes,
because these are anephric patients.
yes.
So even if there is one drop of urine, you know that
Right.
it's
It's coming from the kidney.
and
So how did you kind of judge the ejections and doing biopsies? What did you do for those kind of things? When the urine output would come down, how do you do your judgments on these things?
I think biopsies is just feel the kidney and then
Just
stick
puncture.
it in.
Just puncture.
Yeah, just puncture. And our immunosuppression was basic,
Yeah.
steroids
Yeah.
and azathioprine,
Big dose of steroids.
big doses of steroids.
Yeah.
And with the import restrictions at that time,
Yes.
CMC had to get the Imiran from overseas. And sometimes we used to get caught because these overseas suppliers used to sell us with short shelf life.
Oh,
So after
such challenges.
2 or 3 months, the expiry date.
Okay.
And all the medicines were supplied by us to the patient. Then we started giving them prescriptions.
So how many days of steroids did you use? Well, you must be using about 1 gram, was it?
I think somewhere.
1 gram for 4 or 5 days continuously?
Yeah,
Along with
massive doses.
massive doses.
Yeah, and the problem we had with azathioprine was that we couldn't cope up with enough medication coming from overseas. We have given a prescription to the patient and they would import it directly. And they were being slugged import duty. So we had to go to the government of India and plead with them to classify it as a life-saving drug. And with that, they could escape the duty. Then Welcome Burroughs started importing the powder and tableting it in India and selling it. But because they had to pay the duty, that was more expensive than what the patients were importing.
Absolutely.
And I suppose once the import restrictions are removed, it became so much easier for getting all the medication.
How many days did the recipient and donor, how many days did you keep them?
And stayed for about 2.5
Weeks.
and we went home, and shortly after that we had the second patient.
Yes,
We had prepared 2 patients
right.
just in case one goes wrong.
So we did do some, data collection from, early days, and we saw how, the single digit became double digit in a couple of years, and double digit became, 3 digits in about 5 years in the country. And we saw the first few transplants were only happening in CMC Vellore. I think for the first 3 years, you were the only institution in the country which were doing transplants before I think some other institution in Bombay and in
74, it's
74.
other units started.
Yes. Other institutions started taking it up, before it actually started catching up,
Yeah.
So the first, and Dr. Chaco, when did you join the institution, you said? Nephrology?
I joined the institution long ago as a medical student, but
Yeah, of course.
I joined the department in 1972.
30,
72.
72, yeah.
Nephrology, is it? Or biochemistry, you said?
No, I was in biochemistry for 2 years.
Yes,
I joined for my MD in 72 and spent 6 months.
yes.
In 76, actually, I joined as a DM trainee.
Okay. Dr. Mohan Rao, when both the recipients and donor went home, the first one, did you have a big celebration?
Yes, I think subdued and not a great celebration. But
And what did your
we were relieved.
sorry?
More than anything, we were relieved that
Relieved. And
we established the
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And what kind of follow up did you have on the first few patients? Were they actually in
all these patients. Yeah, all these patients stayed back in Vellore
Yes,
for
sure.
months, and
Months.
there was a small colony.
Yes.
These patients, and they used to have their social occasions, somebody having a birthday, or so everybody in the unit gets invited, and we knew them quite well.
Very well.
Yeah.
Very well. So, tell us about, I know the challenges are the same, the financial constraints, the cost of the immunosuppression. Our challenges have not changed that much. Of course, everything, the technology has changed, there's so much of advancement, but there's still shortage of organs.
I think as far as money goes, I think we used fairly frequently peritoneal dialysis,
Yeah.
and there were no tank of catheters at that time.
Yes.
It is tip feeding and repeated punctures. But we got few people through to transplant. And for us, funding, I think I instigated some of the patients to go and talk to their employers or the unions, and they came up with the money. And it became easier slowly to raise money. And sometimes you get a very rich patients in general urology. He wants to give some donation. He'll say, "Now look, how about adopting these patients and paying up his bill?" So that's how we got them through.
If I may ask, I know this may, what kind of complication rate did you face in the first 3-4 years in the transplant?
I think it's mostly infections.
Infection.
I think our survival rates, graft survival rates were very poor. But compared to what was prevalent at that stage, we were matching. There used to be a central registry at that time run by the American College of Surgeons. And every transplant in the world was reported to them. And we also
Oh,
used to send them to
this
them.
was long time before the internet came. The registry happened.
Yeah, and then, of course, Australia is one of the early ones who started their own registry.
Okay.
And Peter Morris used to be in Melbourne at that time. And he used to send the data to me.
Did you also help, a lot of these transplant programs in other parts of the country, Dr. Mohan Rao?
Yeah, I did. We had a close-knit, close cooperation with everybody. I think if you look at the people at that time, you had Yadev, who was also trained in Australia. He was trained in Melbourne and then came to Adelaide just after I left. And on the physician side, just look, what was his name? Got a metal block. He was trained in Sydney. So I think there's a lot of contribution from Australia.
Okay. I think, Dr. Chaco, you also spent time in Australia, quite a bit of time, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And how long did you spend?
3 years between 1985 and 88.
Okay.
The same unit where he was working at that time.
Hmm.
In fact, I remember distinctly that we used to have to go in and collect the kidneys when they had the retrievals at night.
It was probably like second home for CMC Vellore, Adelaide Hospital.
And one night there was a donor in a hospital which was quite far from where I lived, and from where Dr. Mohan Rao lived. So we met up in the hospital, and when we reached there, the nurse said, sorry, there's an emergency leaking aneurysm, so you'll have to wait.
Oh.
Because obviously, deceased donor nephrectomies or organ retrievals take low priority. So we were sitting in the lounge and drinking coffee, and then he suddenly realized that he had not brought his glasses, spectacles. So finally, when he went into the theater, he borrowed my glasses, and I assisted blind.
Oh. Wow. That's something. So talking about glasses, did you have those, magnifying loupes at that time, Dr. Mohan Rao, by any chance? No.
Yes, loupes were just coming into the market.
Coming to market.
I had a sort of loupes in 70, I think I bought it. These are all, you stick it onto your glasses and halfway they start falling off. And
What about the vascular instruments and so on? Were they available?
Not in India. I think what I did is, and I brought a couple of.
So you bought your own from Australia, I suppose.
Yeah, the unit was kind enough to let me take few, and I showed it to one instrument maker in Madras at that time, and we had few made up.
In fact, when I came back in '95 from England, I brought my own retractor, a Turner Warwick retractor, because in England, in the middle of the night, as you guys did in Australia, you not get any assistance. So the deceased donor, it used to be just me and the nurse, and maybe one other nurse assisting. So there used to be just two nurses and surgeon doing it, because you didn't have any help. It was just the registrar or the senior registrar with the unit would be single-handed, more or less. So I brought my own retractors, my own vascular instruments, even way back in '95, and that actually was great help to me when I started the program in Ramachandra. But I used my own retractor, which, Turner Warwick is a good ring retractor, which kind of, the recipient, you don't need too much of help, especially if you have a patient that's slightly obese, then it really helps. So I can kind of relate my own challenges when I started the program first time in my hospital about the anxiety which you have of not so much the transplant itself, of making sure, transplant sometimes is like luck, like tossing a coin. You don't know which patient is going to do extremely well and which patient is not going to do well.
Yeah,
you do all your preparations, and still the patient may not do too well. And we've got so many variable factors. So it's not the surgery itself. We don't still understand the internal milieu. I'm sure even now, nobody can predict that this transplant is going to be good or this transplant. So there is a luck factor.
Oh, that is.
So those anxieties always play in your mind, that if this, you can do the same technique, you've done it hundreds of times, it's worked on some you don't know why it's not worked. It just beats you. So I can understand the anxieties you may have gone through. And, I don't know if you believe in, prayers, or do you believe in God, or do you believe in the invisible force? But did you say any prayers anytime in these kind of situations?
See, while you are operating, there are times when you wonder, why am I here?
Yes.
How am I going to get out of this theater with my...
Absolutely.
And you get into terrible situations at times. And I'm not one who expresses my anxiety. Even if the situation is terrible, you do say a prayer for yourself. All you are wanting is to get out of the place. One of the problems we faced was getting blood for transfusion. Quite often in CMC, we depended on the patient's relatives, and then how much can they give? And at least 2 occasions, I had to go to the blood bank myself and give a bottle of blood and take the same thing and go to the theater to operate. But there's no other alternative. So just to save my face, I had to do that. And you get into situations like that. I suppose now you don't have a problem with enough blood.
So in Australia, when you were way back in 1970s, that time, of course, disease donor had not started even in Australia. You must be doing only living transplants.
No, we had predominantly deceased donor.
Even in 1970s?
Oh, yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
We depended mostly on that.
Really? Okay.
Even though they started their program with live donor, but we were doing deceased donor at that time.
So with the thing is, with the disease donor, the pressure is a little less, and the vessels are, much more, you can handle the vessels because you can have a cough. And, obviously, as well as with the living, the situation is a little bit more different, obviously,
Yeah, at that time, there was no proper storage facility.
Yeah. Okay.
So as soon as a kidney is removed,
right,
it used to be sent by ambulance to...
So was it brain death or was it circulatory death?
Respiratory death.
Circulatory, mostly.
Circulatory.
So brain death protocols got established in later 1968. So it was still early days, I suppose. It took 3-4 years for this, to get established. Because Christian Bernard's first transplant also was a circulatory death in 1967. So obviously it was the circulatory death disease donors which you were doing more, right? So you must be immediately retrieving it and putting it back into the recipient, I suppose. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about immunosuppression story, Dr. Chacko. From 70s, you saw from 72 onwards, how the immunosuppression has changed over the years. What were you using in the early years?
Yeah,
I know it is steroids, of course.
Those days, it was very difficult to get most of the immunosuppressants. The 2 drugs that were available were steroids and azathioprine.
Yeah.
And among steroids also, methylprednisolone was not easily available. It was very expensive, had to be imported. So for acute rejections, very often we ended up using either dexamethasone or betamethasone, which is not as effective. And then in 1988 or 89, Burroughs Wellcome suddenly tripled the price of Imuran.
Oh.
They hiked up the price by 3-fold. And at that time, Dr. Shastri spoke to one Dr. Lal, who used to be with Glaxo. He was a medical advisor of Glaxo and had just retired and joined what was then called CERL, present RPG. And Dr. Lal was a scientist, and he said, physician plus also a basic scientist. And he said, see, this is a simple chemical molecule. There's nothing great. We will manufacture it. And so that is how actually Azoran came into the Indian market. And we actually did a lot of the initial trials in CMC. Then, of course, I think in 85 to 88, when cyclosporin came, I think that really revolutionized the whole solid organ transplant program, as everybody knows. And since then, other than tacrolimus, none of the others have really been very good, except sirolimus and everolimus have their own.
Of course, more recent, but I'm talking about more of the 70s and 80s.
That is nothing really very much. Of course, the concept of monoclonals and
Of course, this is more recent.
yeah, I think like rather than treating with a shotgun, which is what we used to do, you probably have rifles and bullets now to be a bit more precise in what you're hitting.
Thank you, Dr. Chago. I want to ask the participants in the room if they have any questions they would like to ask. If they have questions, please feel free. We'll give you opportunity to question Dr. Mohan Rao or Dr. Chago.
I think the biggest advance I can see is introduction of the lap donor nephrectomy for the live donor.
Wanted to come to that also of yours. When did you start lap donor nephrectomy? Now that you mentioned
97.
97. And this was, of course, in Australia.
Yes, I think I stumbled on seeing this on the internet.
Oh, really?
A report of Johns Hopkins doing a live donor nephrectomy. So I thought, why not we explore that? So I asked Arthur Suture, the surgical company, whether they could
help
me.
Yeah.
And what I wanted out of them is instruments.
Yes.
Instruments and money to buy the pigs. And I got hold of one colorectal surgeon who was quite good with his hands and using the instruments. I didn't have that much of laparoscopic skills at that time. Arthur Suture, I told them, if we can bring it on to clinical use, they can sell more instruments.
Sure, absolutely.
Incentive to get used to team up with me. And we practiced on the pigs for about 4 months. And then we thought we must bring it on to the clinical scene. And I talked to one lady who was scheduled to give a kidney to her adult son, and I explained to her the benefits of lap versus open. And I told her, if we succeed, we're going to replace it, this procedure, open nephrectomy. And I thought, she'll say, I'll think about it. But she said, oh, yeah, go ahead. And so that's where we started. And at that time, they had a hand port, which is a chicken variety, not the present gel port or anything. You have to put an adhesive, and then it's a long sleeve on your hand. And so that gave me the confidence. I thought, while doing that laparoscopy, we can have the hand there. And
so did you use the hand port in the first few lap nephrectomies?
The first 2 nephrectomies we used.
Oh, right. Okay.
The Smith and nephew had these hand ports, which I saw at an American College of Surgeons meeting.
Yeah. So your left hand went inside and your right hand was doing the operation.
Yeah. And that's how we started off. And then we found that half the time leaking and all that thing, we gave up.
Yeah.
By that time also we got more confidence. And it became popular. And we started getting patients from interstate
Right.
And I had one, somebody in the health commission, our health, said they should, the money that is the patients bringing from other states should go into the health commission. I argued against it, but I couldn't succeed. So they put a ban on me, saying that I can't take any patients from interstate.
Uh,
I had one donor who rang me up. He's a homosexual,
oh,
wanted to give a kidney to his brother.
okay.
And the team in Sydney said that we don't take kidneys from dead homosexuals. So why should we take it from you?
Hmm.
If you want us to take it, you be celibate for 2 months, repeat the HIV test, then we might consider. So he went and asked the Kidney Foundation for a second opinion, and they gave
Oh,
me a number. So he rang me up. I said, "Will you take me on?" I said, "Yeah." How does your brother feel about it?
uh,
Oh, my brother is quite comfortable. He got no problems. I thought, if we can accept him,
right.
that means he is watching for
Sure.
his one partner relationship. And but I said, look, I got a ban on these interstate patients. But
Oh,
why don't you go to the media and why don't you talk to your local parliamentarian? So he
uh,
sent emails to every parliament member, opposition leader.
right.
They have started bombarding Queen Elizabeth and our state health commission.
Really.
And he managed to get through, and we
There
did
you go.
a good
That
job.
became that must have got reported as well. Many media as well, I suppose, gave
So
publicity away.
yeah, you get into interesting situations.
Yeah, yeah. So many, good stories we have in the field of transplants. I know, and we can go on. I know we have just crossed an hour,
Yeah.
of our time. Uh,
Okay.
and not many questions coming from. I think everybody is quite, amazed at the experience you people have had way back, and being the pioneers and championing the whole thing, and even now doing things which are remarkable. You introduced the first, you got rid of the, at least the trans, those trans lumbar punctures, and you got the CT angiograms also in place, which is again, a great move.
CT angio is another story. I think I went to American Transplant Society, and
Meeting.
there was one single report of
Yes,
CT angiogram
right.
by a radiologist, and he said, it has a potential to replace the conventional angiogram. And when I came back to my hospital, we didn't have a CT angiogram, a CT machine in our hospital. There was one in private sector. So I talked to the private radiologist. I said, look, can you do the angiogram free of cost to the unit and free of cost to the patient? And we did about 15 and compared it with the conventional one, and then switched on to CT. And we were the first unit in Australia to switch on to CT.
So many benefits to the patient community in the end, obviously,
Yeah.
of all the innovations which we don't realize, who actually triggered it, how the thought triggered in your mind when you went to see the American college, and how the change came in Australia. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody kind of documents these things, but obviously the change, once it's made, there's so much of benefit to the patient community.
Another thing is that oh, age has nothing to do
Age has nothing to do, yes, of
with
course.
the practice, the lap donor nephrectomy.
Yes,
I started doing when I turned 65,
I know.
time by the which I should have retired long before.
So I heard Money Menon, Dr. Money Menon, the robot guy, first time when he came to India, he spoke in our hospital, and he told me, Sunil, I started doing my robotic nephrectomy. I mean, no, robotic surgery, robotic kind of prostatectomies at the age of 58, And that really has given me a new life, and it has changed my whole perspective, and I feel young again. So age, as you said, has nothing to do with any of these procedures or whatever you do, because you can still innovate. And you at the age of 65 started lab nephrectomies, and look at what it is now. Everybody, the accepted norm is becoming the gold standard for retrieval for kidney now. Even in India too, I think majority of our kidneys are being done by lap nephrectomies or robotic nephrectomies for that matter, using the robot as well. So things are changing very fast. I think, our young surgeons are very skilled, you know,
Oh,
India
yeah.
has, of course, a great future, as such. Georgie, would you want to say anything?
I just want to, because Johnny is not much mentioned here. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Professor K.V. Johnny at the University of Kuwait from 1984 to 86. And it was a different ball game in transplantation there. Because the late, very famous transplant surgeon, Dr. George Abuna, dominated the picture. And there was hardly any live transplantation in the Mubarak Al Kabir Hospital at that time. It was all kidneys which were coming from either from Europe or from America, which they have rejected, which was reaching Kuwait because of Dr. Abuna's influence with those people, because he was also in America and UK at that time. And it was a very difficult situation because we had to give the recipients to them. And the cold ischemia time could be as high as 120 hours and things like that. So despite all these things, Dr. Abuna was willing to do the transplant. And we used to have a transplant meeting. I think it was in once in every 2 weeks with a British man as an immunologist, and discussing about the patients and whether the recipients who were on our side could get the transplant. And I should mention that Yoni was a very astute clinician and who looked at every aspect of the patient, the recipient. And although he had very little to play in the transplant program, because the whole scenario was dominated by George Abuna and his fellows. So when the kidney rejects, the patient comes back to us for dialysis again. So it was a very unique experience at that time, working with Dr. Johnny and Dr. Abuna on one side and Dr. Johnny on the other side. And I enjoyed that because it was something which I learned, because it is Dr. Abuna who published for the first time a diabetic kidney put into a non-diabetic. It was published in Lancet at that time as a case report. And the recipient was a non-diabetic, and all the diabetic changes resolved over a period of time. So these are all good experiences, you have learned through your connections with Dr. Johnny and also with Chaco, because I joined for my nephrology in Vellore. Dr. Chaco just returned from Edmonton, and he was along with Dr. Shastri. And Chaco was enjoying the whole scene, along with doing rounds in one place, Shastri doing the rounds in another place. And the only medication available at that time for treatment of rejection was steroid. And we could see that, we do the biopsy, and high dose IV steroids, hydrocortisone or betamethasone were the only drugs available. And we had our part of our share of rejections also at that time. So I just want to end that with these particular notes. And I want to say that the two doyens of transplantation in India, Professor Mohan Rao and Dr. K.V. Joni and Dr. Chaco, were kind enough to contribute the first chapter of our textbook of renal transplantation in developing countries by Oxford Press. I'm sure that this memory will stay forever, because the first chapter always has the most important part in the textbook. And I thank them and I wish them long life. And I hope their trailblazing journey was an example and incredible model for many people in India and in South Asia.
Thank you, Georgie. So, Dr. Mohan Rao, are you still following what is happening in India?
I do, but not actually. I think I have lost most of my contacts. I think most of my era people have completely retired, or some have passed away. So, except for what I see in the journals, I don't.
No, I mean, but do you visit India
I
sometimes?
do, Yeah, I do come, mostly for family reasons,
Yes.
siblings there.
And what's the kind of future you see, Dr. Chako? You've seen it all as well in India for kidney transplants and organ transplants in India. Do you think the disease donor transplant is going to be here and going to grow and grow and grow?
Sorry, what was that, Sunil?
I said that what do you think of the organ transplant scene in India 5 years or 10 years from now? How do you see it?
How do I see it? And I think it's getting more organized and certainly more orderly. And I think the donor program, though it's very slow, I think it is progressing. You know, we started transplants at Baptist only in September, and we've already done 2 deceased donors, so it's not bad going it. So,
Yeah.
of course, the every now and then the bad eggs turn up and we get a lot of adverse publicity in the press, which, which happens from time to time.
I know.
But I think that generally things are on the mend as far as I can see. The only thing is, I think there's a lot more people being trained, both as urologists and nephrologists. So I think it's going to become more widely available. And dialysis being almost universally available now, really, with many of the governments supporting it. So, on the whole, I think the care for chronic kidney disease is improving. And I certainly hope that 5 years will be better than what it is now.
Definitely. Definitely. So thank you very much, Professor Mohan Rao, Professor
Thank you very much.
Dr. Georgie Abraham, and all the audience. This is, of course, recorded and we going to be on live on YouTube and on Facebook. So thank you again for being here and sparing your evening to us, Dr. Professor Mohan Rao, and wish you well. And I'm sure we'll be in touch again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks, Georgie, for organizing this. Nice
Thank
to meet you, sir, after a long time.
Thank you, sir.